Welcome to Magnifi Plus, where we help you invest with intelligence. I'm Nicole Lapin, former CNBC, CNN, and Bloomberg anchor, and investing with intelligence, especially now as the midterm elections are upon us, is of utmost importance. All investors are dealing with inflation at a 40-year high, interest rates that are skyrocketing, and two very different approaches from our two political parties on how to save this economy. So this may actually be one of the most important elections in decades. Today's guest is Harold Ford Jr., the Executive Vice President and Vice Chairman of Corporate and Institutional Banking for PNC Bank. Prior to PNC Bank, Harold was the Vice Chairman and Senior Policy Advisor of Bank of America Merrill Lynch. Before that, he was a Managing Director and Senior Client Relationship Manager at Morgan Stanley. Harold also served in Congress for 10 years, representing Tennessee's 9th Congressional District, and was a member of the House Financial Services, Budget, and Education Committees, as well as the Congressional Black Caucus. And Harold also taught public policy at Vanderbilt University and the University of Michigan. Harold, I need a breath after that bio, but welcome.
Go blue, and my mother would love that bio. Thank you. You didn't have to say all that.
Well, it's great to have you with us. Of course, the midterms are upon us, and we're seeing folks conducting searches on interest rates, as you can imagine, and the elections. Your background is literally in the intersection of politics and Wall Street. So what do you expect to come out of the midterms?
So, midterm elections, as we all know, is really a referendum on the party in power, and that party is often the president's party. In this instance, the president's party is control of both the House and the Senate. So the stakes, as I think you aptly described, and I think you gave a great description also of really what's energizing and the issues rather, and the elements that are energizing the race. So it's really a referendum on those things. As we sit here today, I think a couple things, as we sit a few days out from the election, a couple things really loom large. One is whose base is most energized to go out and vote. And the most recent polling suggests there's vacillation there, but it seems as we get near the final lap here, Republicans seem to have a bit of an advantage, a small advantage in the turnout. Two, where do independents stack up as they think about the president's standing and the president's position on the most important issues? And you outlined them all well, from inflation to the border to crime. It's interesting, as you mentioned, interest rates. That's not really in the president's province, obviously, because of the independence of the Fed. But politically speaking, voters think of the president's party as having some say in the direction of interest rates, and for that matter, how that direction is being pursued and how it affects voters and everyday Americans. So as we sit here today, Republicans probably have a little bit of an advantage as we look at momentum heading into the final several days. I think the House will likely go Republican. If the Republicans can't win the House in 2022, they probably should get out of the business of politics, largely because they have redrawn districts over the last 2 or 3 years to really advantage Republican candidates. This is not an indictment on anyone or suggesting that they did it illicitly, but they have done it. And I think it's given Republicans an advantage as we head into in addition to the issues. But the Senate's a little different because you can't redraw states. You can't take part of Idaho and put in New York, and you can't part of New York and put in North Dakota. They're contiguous places with real hard lines around them. And in this instance, it's not every seat is not up every time. Whereas in the House, all 435 are up at one time. Whereas in the Senate, it's about a third, and a third in 1 year. One of those terms every 6 years, it's 34 seats. This go around, we have a little more because there's some special elections, including the one in Georgia that's up this time. I think that we're going to have to wait until election night to really find out what happens there. And as we think about the gubernatorial races, which are critical for the presidential race 2 years from now, I think Republicans find themselves at a little bit of an advantage as we head into those races. I think all of this is interesting, Nicole, for one reason that I think one of the things I think is lacking in American politics and national politics today is I think we think about partisanship and the ferocity around it and the polarization around our politics today. But as we look at some of these states, I think we could see voters voting one party, one part of the ticket, and another party, the other part of the ticket, be They might vote for the governor's race in one party and switch to a different person in the Senate race, which I think is a positive for the body politic, even if it doesn't benefit my party. And I'm a Democrat. I think it shows that it continues to show the sophistication and the maturity of voters and how they're able to think about issues and think about how those different elected offices impact their lives and impact their jobs, impact their communities, and frankly, impact the issues that you started the question out with.
Yeah, and you said so much good stuff there. I want to double click on what you said about the Fed being an independent body. Do you really believe that? A lot of people on Wall Street don't. I mean, do you think that Powell will look at monetary policy as a result of the midterms? Like if Republicans sweep, do you think that he'll interpret that as interest rates just didn't work or tame inflation?
Well, I think so. There's ample evidence, and I got a lot of friends, a lot of really smart friends, and we have some in common who think that there might be some influence that, or that the Fed's independence is steadily being eroded. And it's just not this election. When I was in Congress, there were efforts to bring the Fed chair before the various committees, and as you know, the Fed chair goes before the House and Senate financial services and banking committees, respectively, a few times a year to give updates. But there were efforts by some in Congress and by and that time, Senator Rand Paul, his father and I served in Congress together. And his father was a real believer that the Fed that the Fed was not as independent as it should be, and that there were efforts to try to restrain some of their to infringe upon some of their resources that the Congress that might have provided. But I think the Fed has demonstrated throughout, even with encroachments, even with pressures and winds trying to influence them, I think they have shown as much of a detachment. And we're all human, so we're obviously influenced by our families and by media and by technology. But I think that they have shown a detachment in some ways. Now, I think those of us who believe that the pressure may be greater now than it's been in years, I think there's a strong argument to be made for that. I mean, there are a number of senators, bipartisan group of senators, and largely Democrats this go around, who have urged Chairman Powell to halt the brakes here on the increases and the interest rate increases and hikes. And certainly that would probably advantage the party in power if the stock market were to continue to, if the stock market went back up and people's 401ks stopped shrinking. There's certainly a political benefit to that. But I think the Fed has shown a level of independence here. Now, what happens after the election, I can't predict if Chairman Powell will be different. But as I look at how he's conducted himself, he has been able to stave off and put up guardrails with, as he listens to and shows deference to members of Congress, even though they may not have shown him the kind of deference that his job what you would want for him and his job. I think he's done a pretty good job. Now, does that mean that senators and congressmen are not going to try to influence? Of course not. They will continue, I think, in the short term and intermediate term to try to do that. But I don't think that Chairman Powell is going to be moved by political forces, or I should say, if he is, I'd be surprised. But what I will not be surprised about is if members of Congress and the Senate continue to try to exert some political pressure on the Fed to do what they think is in the best interest of the economy and what they think is in the best interest of our markets, financial markets.
Yeah, no doubt. And just a couple of weeks ago, some senators did just that. But what do you think this means for investments? How does this policy even relate to investments if Democrats retain control of House and Senate? Do you think we're going to see more of a green agenda, EV, solar, decarbonization? If the GOP regains control, do you think that's going to be good for investments in energy, traditional oil and gas?
So I think if Republicans win the House and the Senate, and maybe just the House, I think they would certainly 2 or 3 of the first pieces of legislation that they're going to try to advance. And if they win the Senate, I think they'll probably try to coordinate with the leaders in both chambers, McConnell and McCarthy, because that looks like those will be the respective Senate Majority Leader and Speaker of the House. And again, these are ifs. But if they do that, I think you can probably look for a pretty serious and detour and departure from where we've been as it relates to domestic energy production. I think they will offer legislation right away to put on the president's desk on that front for a host of reasons. One, I think that gas prices obviously are huge pressure, and underneath that, the kind of how energy now plays into the national security matrix in a more obvious way for everyday voters and everyday politicians. Two, I think you would see an effort to undo parts of the Inflation Reduction Act. And part of that would, if you just listen to what the Republicans have said, there are things they don't like around how they think that the allowing Medicare to negotiate with big pharma is going to reduce innovation, which will, they think, have a negative impact on the economy. And I think you will find efforts to reduce taxes on some of those who saw taxes raised, particularly in the corporate community, that were part of that Inflation Reduction Act. That would be, if the House goes Republican, I think those will be three of the first 4 or 5 things they do. And if the Senate goes Republican, I think they will find a way to marry together. I do think that Republicans in the House and the Senate will have to reconcile some of their opposing views around a few things. The Republicans in the House, have a piece of campaign dogma that they're promoting. I think it's called the Commitment to America, and the Republicans in the Senate have something called Renew America. And there's some differences in what they view as priorities. But I think those 2 or 3 things would certainly be at the very top of the list. I don't think there would be much new spending on anything from climate, for that matter, to even if we face some sort of hardship in the country, continued hardship or even greater hardship. I don't think there'll be an appetite for more government spending. To 2 parties, if it shifts to the House and the Senate shifts. But as long as the House shifts, you still got to have that pass in the House. As we know, that any money raised and tax cuts, they have to start in the House by the Constitution says that. So the House is critical for them to take in that regard when it comes to the kind of spending policy that we talk about. Now, the flip side of that is I think there's going to be a lot of other noise that I don't know how the market will interpret, how the market will react to. I think it's safe to say if the House turns Republican, that there will be a lot of investigations. I think that there'll probably be one of the first 10 pieces of legislation dropped will be acts to impeach President Biden. I think there will be efforts right away to investigate everybody in the Biden family, including Hunter Biden, and probably even investigate Dr. Fauci as a part of a larger investigation about the origins of COVID. I don't know if the leader of the Republicans in the House, and that being the Speaker and the majority leader, whoever they choose in their leadership, is going to tolerate a whole bunch of that, because I think politics is always about looking forward if you're going to be successful. And if Republicans, want to have a successful run for the presidency, they can't be seen as looking backwards or looking back rather at things. So I think that pressure, I'm a Democrat, but I want the body politic to work. And the body politic is healthier when both parties are healthy. I may differ with my Republican colleagues on energy, except I pretty much agree with them largely. Maybe it's a bad example. I may disagree with them on other things, but what I don't want to do is look back. Let's look forward and have these debates. And I need that party to be healthy for the country to have the chance to do some of the things that we need as a nation to do going forward.
And the markets as well. You're one of the few people in Washington who really understands the markets. It sounds like you think the Fed is independent adjacent, but what do you think about interest rates after the election? If you could look into your crystal ball, what do you see with interest rates, and do you think we're heading toward an inflation? What would your metrics be for that? We've seen an inverted yield curve and GDP and other metrics, but how do you frame it?
So I live in New York. I have a lot of friends in DC, and I love DC, and it's where I come from, and it's a big part of who I am. I think I take the Fed at what they say, as I think we all do. But I really kind of hang on to a lot of the words that I mean, my old colleague and partner at the firm, Gary Kaminsky, and I. Gary taught me a lot of this. You got to listen to him, and if someone tells you you're going to do something, you ought to believe they're going to do it. They have asked for some help from government. They've asked for some fiscal help as well. And I think they may get some form of it, regardless of what the outcome here is in this election. And they certainly are going to be challenged if the place changes from Democrat to Republican. Republicans are going to act, and I say challenged, they might be buttressed, they might be challenged, but they certainly will face a different set of realities, legislative priority realities. And we'll see how they adjust to that. I'm like every red-blooded American, every red-blooded investor. I want the markets to have the best chance, and my investments to have the best chance to succeed. And the Fed has made clear that their number one priority is to fight inflation. I guess one of the things they're going to have to determine after the election, and I'm sure they're determining now, it's not just an election that's going to make them look more closely at it, but clearly if the political dynamics change in Washington, it will cause them to think about things differently. But they've got to decide, does that remain the only priority for them as we head into the end of this year and next year? And I'm sure there are a number of factors that they've already enumerated that they're going to think about. But one of the things I agree with you wholeheartedly on, Nicole, around the either the independence or the adjacency or somewhere in between of the Fed into our political system, there will be no shortage of advice that the Fed will get from those in elected office about what they should be doing or what they should not be doing. And it probably will be more intense because we're heading into a presidential race. One of the bizarre things about American politics today is that the presidential race starts right after the presidential race from before, and then it starts with even more intensity after the midterm election. So you think about where we are today. In 3 months, we will probably have 2 or 3 candidates announced for the presidency on one side or another, and in 6 months we'll have as many as 6 or 7 people, or for that matter, whomever is going to run will likely be a candidate for president, which seems so far away. It seems like we're still litigating the 2020 campaign. And here we are now already have entrants, maybe even on the Democratic side as well, but certainly on the Republican side over the next several months. So there'll be no shortage of advice for the Fed. I hope they adhere to what they say they have had, that has guided their thoughts, and for that matter, informed their decision-making over the last several months, which is data. And that's all we can ask for those of us who are investors and those of us who work on Wall Street.
Who do you think should run?
Far above my pay grade.
Come on.
As I said before, what I hope for is just seriousness, and I hope for healthy parties. What I will say this, and I'll say it again. I hope that if the Republicans take the majority in the House and the Senate, that they don't look back. I think no party, and for that matter, the country is not served when we only have 2 political parties in the country. We're not a nation that has a coalition system where you have 20 parties or 30 parties, or for that matter, 5 or 6 parties, and you got to find a majority working within that political framework. We have 2 political parties. So if one is not healthy, if one is not only looking back, but doesn't seem to be serious about the problems and the challenges, or serious about facing those challenges and serious about offering solutions, we all suffer. Because I don't think even if it's my party, and I'm a Democrat, I don't want the Democrats to control everything, because I think when I say control everything, I mean, if there's nobody challenging them, then they're going to be in charge. If the Republicans and the Republicans vice versa are the party that's in charge and Democrats are not being serious, then, it encourages a kind of, I think, irresponsibility, and it encourages a kind of hubris that is not good in politics and not good in the development of policy. So I hope for healthy parties, strong parties. Wouldn't be honest if I didn't say I want my party to have a little bit of an edge. But if my party loses out, at least we lose out to serious ideas and serious people. And I think there's a dearth of seriousness in both parties, and that we need an elevation of that more than anything. The Republicans, who knows? The one thing I think we should all be mindful of, and we should all be honest about, is if the Republicans win the House and the Senate, and particularly the Senate, it'll be because a lot of the candidates that former President Trump endorsed and campaigned for won. And some of those instances, some of those candidates are candidates who don't believe that the 2020 race was won by Joe Biden. Like, I don't think that's serious. I think you can say you wanted Donald Trump to win because you loved all of his ideas, and I respect that, but the race is over. You got to look forward. So the question becomes, do those candidates look forward and say, we're going to now we want to defeat Joe Biden, which I think is fine to do. That's what our system is based on. The other party runs against the party in power, but not to try to undo the election that happened a few years ago. You got to look forward and want to beat somebody on ideas and policy. That's what I hope for.
Okay, so I think we could kind of read between the lines there. Of course, a big part of your heart and expertise is in Washington, but being in New York and at PNC, you're, of course, working with some of the bank's biggest clients there. What are they saying to you, and how are you helping them figure out their investment policies amid all this uncertainty and, midterms coming up? How would you advise them?
So we have a lot of people at the bank that help think about our investment strategy and help impart that. And I'm part of a team that gives some counsel on that. Look, they want what your question, first of all the things that you identified in your first question and the way you frame your first question are all the things that are on voters' minds, on our clients' minds. They're, as they think about how they invest, as they think about strategies around their portfolios and so forth. Are taxes going to be increased? Can we depend on the federal government to continue to invest in things that are going to make America competitive? How about our energy policy? What's going to happen on that front? Can we have some more certainty and reliability around that? So those things, certainly taxes and energy are at the forefront of a lot of thinking of our everyday investors and our most sophisticated investors and everybody in between that the bank is blessed to have as customers and clients. And they recognize that politics, things change, but I think at the heart of what they're saying is what we've been trying to convey, or what I've been trying to convey to as a part of my answer to some of your questions. People want seriousness to be the foundation of whatever challenges we're dealing with. Like I give you an example. I say in my party, I'm a believer in climate change. There's no question in my mind that this is man-made. There's no question we have to think about ways to transition to different energy sources over the many years. But we'd be foolish to not recognize that we cannot transition overnight from our dependence on fossil fuels to a platform that is based on green and wind and solar. It's just not going to happen. And energy now has become a huge part of how we have to think about national security. For those who don't want to deal with parts of the world that produce big deposits of oil and gas every year, then we got to think about how we produce it here if we're serious about it. Or two, if we only want a green energy platform, we have to understand their consequences for this. So I think investors just want, again, a level of seriousness from the parties. When it comes to immigration, there's no doubt we have a border security problem. Both parties have to wrestle with that, but we also have a productivity challenge in our country and a need to build population centers to create new jobs and to fill new jobs. And we'd be foolish not to understand that immigration has been an integral part of how we have increased American productivity over the many years. Does there have to be a balance? Of course, we have to protect our border, but we have to find ways in which to continue to incent a growing and vibrant and capable workforce in our country if we want to grow. That's the seriousness. I give just two examples. That's a seriousness that I think sometimes is missing. And as I listen to our clients and listen to investors, that's what they are as interested in as they are interested in. Don't get me wrong, they have personal views about things, but as they think about their investment strategy, they want a government that's going to offer reliable policy, forward-thinking policy, and policy that puts America and our national interest as opposed to the partisan and political interest or party interest first before the nation's.
And PNC, of course, is super strong with leading regional capital markets. What are some of the corporate clients' concerns you're hearing now?
Look, you nailed it at the beginning. I think there's a concern about interest rates. There's a concern about tax policy. And there's a concern about what we do again on as it relates to energy going forward. Again, everybody has their own personal preferences and opinions about politics and about personalities in politics. We try our hardest to stay away from that. I mean, what we're trying to do is to help, as I would imagine a lot of our peers and competitors do as well. What we want to do is try to provide the best advice based on what our political structure in the country looks like. You think about this, Nicole, when I was in Congress, when I got to Congress, it was 1996. In 1994, Republicans had won the majority for the first time in more than 40 years. Since 1994, the Congress has changed. So that's 30 years ago. It changed in 2006, 2010, 2018, and it's likely going to change again in 22 if you look at if we accept the conventional polling wisdom. So that's 4 times in 30 years the House will switch from Democrat to Republican. Before, it hadn't changed but once in more than 40 years. So I think the country, like everything else that in our lives, I'm 52 years old. The real constancy and the one constant in my life has been change in just about everything in business and it's grip politics as well. And technology has been a big driver of that. So our clients and our customers think about, how is technology going to change the way we do everything continue to change the way we do everything in our lives, from how we consume music, to how we bank, to how we consume energy, or for that matter, even produce it. So I think they want a government that's going to partner and not hold back the private sector from innovating, not hold back the private sector from continuing to make things better and things simpler, and for that matter, giving us more access and lowering price and costs to everything. But at the same time, they want to know that our government also is serious about how they do it. Because if you're not serious about how you do it, I don't see how we achieve these things. So we try to, be as honest about these things as we possibly can without being partisan, and certainly without injecting our own political views. People know I'm a Democrat, but I try to call balls and strikes as we think about policy, and more importantly, as we get into the final innings here, if not the final inning of a closely watched and closely divided political election heading into our midterms.
You sure do. So can you call it on the SPAC market too? I'm trying to think of the baseball analogy here. It's not coming to mind just yet, but of course we saw this huge boom. You were asked to be a chairman of a SPAC. There was all this speculation, a bunch of deals blew up. Do you think the SPAC boom is completely over?
No, I don't know. I think if you look at, I've seen some data in the last few weeks. If you look at the performance of some of the IPO market over the last 12 to 18 months, and you look at the performance of the SPAC market over the last 12 to 18 months, it really mirrors one another in a lot of ways. There's certainly different economics and there are different incentives to both of those structures without question. But there's certainly advantages and disadvantages for a company to look at one vehicle or the other to try to go public. I think the SEC will have a big say in all of this, particularly as it relates to SPACs. And the economics around SPACs are likely to change. I chaired a SPAC where we were giving away all of our promote to charities and initiatives that seek to advance economic equality for Black communities across the country. And we had a particular notion, a particular kind of company, or for that matter, the way we wanted the company to look after we combined with them. We wanted some diversity in the company's management ranks and board ranks. I think more and more as SPACs think about their future, I think they're definitely a part of our going public strategy future, I think, in our markets. But I think the way they are structured today will likely be changed. And I hope that the bodies that do that, including the SEC and maybe even Congress, influencing the SEC, will do in a way that will preserve the very best of what SPACs offer, which is giving, I think, companies an opportunity who may not be fit for the IPO route, but who may be fit to be public, to continue to give them that opportunity to do that.
Yeah, and to raise capital in a different vehicle. Quickly before we let you go, can you give us some predictions for next Tuesday? Any surprises you think might be in store?
So I'll tell you that there are three things I'm watching. In addition, look, I'm going to watch all of I think that early on in the night, we're going to get some, the first part of the night, you're going to get some results from New Hampshire, which I think will be an interesting race to watch, the Senate race. You're going to get some results from some of the counties that report early in Pennsylvania. And there will be some indicators as to how the night might be going. I think the race that I'm going to watch, let's step back. Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada are the four races. I think the conventional thinking from the prognosticators and polls is they're right. Those are the four races to watch. Arizona, obviously, and Nevada on the West Coast. So those polls will close later. We'll get some results from Georgia and Pennsylvania prior because of the 3-hour time difference that we have. So we'll get some sense of how things are going. The two races, Nicole, that I find most interesting, one is a Senate race in Utah between the incumbent Mike Lee, and he has an independent running against him. I think his name is Evan McMullen. This guy, he's a Republican independent running, but he's been able to raise money from Democrats and independents and a lot of Republicans alike across the country because he's made clear he will not, if he's elected, he will not caucus with the Republicans or Democrats, which we have independents in the Senate. Some people don't realize this, but Bernie Sanders identifies as an independent politically, but he's caucuses with the Democrats. Angus, gosh, I'm embarrassed. The senator from, his name will come to, senator from Maine. He identifies as independent, but he Angus King, I think is his name. He caucuses with the Democrats. This fellow in Utah says he will not caucus with Republicans or Democrats. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. And he's in a pretty close race still with the incumbent there, Mike Lee. And I might add, Mike Lee, the senator in Utah, has not been endorsed by his senior senator, who is a fellow named Mitt Romney. The other race I will watch with some curiosity, just because I think it'll be interesting to see what he does in 2 years, is the governor's race in Florida. I think Governor DeSantis is very likely to be reelected. It'll be interesting to see the margin that he's reelected by. And it'll be interesting to hear his speech that night, win or lose, particularly if he wins, which I think the polls suggest that he will. How he conducts himself and how he projects. Does he give a speech only about Florida? Does he give a speech about the country? Because I think if he gives a speech about the nation, I think he will be obviously angling towards running for president himself. But it's going to be interesting for me to hear how he talks about former President Trump, because the two of them have butted heads here over the last few weeks, if not the last few months. And he seems to be the likeliest, I should say the strongest of those if you're not for President Trump, the number 2 person in that party for president seems to be DeSantis. So those are the two things I'm looking for. I'm looking at as a kind of one that kind of loves politics and practices it and consumes it a lot. But those 4 states, Arizona, Nevada, Pennsylvania, I should say not because Pennsylvania is a Commonwealth, and Georgia, those are the 4 I think you need to watch as it relates to what's going to happen in terms of the majority in the Senate. And if you listen to prognosticators today, they think that Republicans could very well win all 4 of those states. I'm not convinced of that, but I am convinced that I'm more convinced that Republicans will win the House than the Senate.
Well, we will be watching, and no doubt you will too. Thank you so much, Harold, for sharing all of your insights in investing in politics.
Thank you for having me.
So Harold, of course, talked a lot about green energy and gave us some predictions. He thinks the Republicans are going to take over the House, but let's say he's wrong. And let's say the Democrats retain control. The beautiful thing about Magnifi is that you can put into the search bar green energy. It is easy. It is simple. And then beyond that, you can search or sort by relevance, return, fee, or risk. So let's look at this and let's sort by return. And let's say that we look at high return green funds. You'll see Enphase there. You'll see a few ETFs and a mutual fund. Let's say Harold was right and the Republicans do take control. We might want to research energy independence. So our search could be something like, how do I invest in US funds with energy production? And let's look at those results. And we can sort again by relevance or return, fee, or risk. And let's sort by return here again. And we can see that we have First Trust ETF, Invesco ETF. And then you can see on the right-hand side that related searches auto-populate for you as well. So for more information on the intersection of intelligent investing and the midterm elections, please visit us at magnifi.com.